Personal property has increased a little bit. The question is that we are going out this year, obviously to do an update on our appraisal, but do an update on personal property taxes to making sure that everybody is paying their fair share, which has always been an issue. We are not proposing yet this year any increase on fees, but we are going to look at it in the first 6 months. Obviously, we're looking at refreshing some of our buildings. Not that we expect fees to come anywhere near cover that refreshing of the buildings, but these are things that needed to be done. The mini will be the first example, and that should be wrapped up towards the end of this week or early next week for the unveiling. We will see some increases in revenues this year because we'll actually have cruise ships coming in, but I think like anything else, the staff wants to hear what you may look at raising fees, or what the public may want to look at as raising fees. We have had now, last year we had a summer sales tax holiday. This year we're having a summer sales tax holiday. This is going off a little bit more evenly than they have in previous years. It's been suggested that we go to a 6% year-round sales tax, which would still collect more than we would normally take in. And, Nikki and I have looked at the possibility of maybe taking a portion of that and putting it against property taxes. So that's pretty much, we're not sure where much more revenues can be generated. I think the thought was, what do you all think? What do you think is a possible scenario? Your two big numbers are sales tax and property tax, and the other ones are a much smaller subset to fees and personal property tax. I don't have the number in front of me. I should have brought the budget down. Nikki, I can probably tell you right now.
For personal tax for F23 was about $545,000.
Right. And that's about 1.3 bills. Because a mill is over 400,000 now. So this is one of the several items that Brian had on your work session list.
I don't remember what precipitated that. Was there some kind of discussion of different things other than just putting it out there of what can we increase? Was there some kind of other discussion going on?
I think there was. Go ahead.
Yeah, it was just a request sometime, and it's been over a year. A work session on potential different revenue streams.
Can we vary them for bringing additional revenue through non-traditional sources?
Do we have any projections? I see that. Thank you for adding the line item on the online sales tax, 400,000. Do we expect that number to increase? Do we think it's reached a steady? Obviously, it's going to increase, with higher cost and inflation. But are we capturing more and more merchants, online merchants? Have we pretty much captured, do you think, as much as we're going to get? Any thoughts on that?
Well, there was a meeting with the third-party collection source through the AML. They have most of the large mail order, vendors. Before it was simply Amazon, but others have come on board. They are now at over 500 or 50%, I think it is, of the potential people that should be potentially paying sales tax. Now that's for all of Alaska. That may not include Nome, but all of Alaska, they still see that growing, but it's not going to be growing apparently as fast as it did when we first joined that effort. When we first joined that effort, I guess it was right when I got started here. And certainly we saw a tremendous rise. And of course, we'll probably be seeing the inflationary impact that we're seeing, here. That's impacting everywhere. But you always can't think that inflation is always going to be, if you look at driving taxes, if we can encourage hotel development in the community, that could increase room tax revenue. We don't have a program for that. I would be looking at, obviously, the new economic development director. That'd be having some conversations with some of the larger organizations in town. The Polaris burned down. We are down a number of hotel rooms still. And if we want to grow visitation up here, we have some hotel rooms. What that number is, I don't have it. But there was a time in this country we had a lot of package deals with, I don't know who arranged it. I know Alaska Airlines was involved. How do we encourage people to make maybe a 1 or 2 day visit up here while they're in Alaska?
One of the challenges of the traditional hotel, and Gerald could probably speak to this a lot better than I can, but one of the challenges with large infrastructure seasonal is the seasonality of it. Hotels do great in the summertime, but sometimes, as I recall, vacancy factors in hotels in Nome in the wintertime can be like 80%. And I don't know if the city is in any kind of position or what they could do to offer, a reduction in some kind of cost or make it more attractive for, people to look at those, because it seems like it's like with a lot of businesses in Nome, seasonality is a challenge to make projects and businesses pencil. You're making all your income in 3 or 4 months out of the year, but you got your costs 12 months out of the year. That's obviously creates some additional headaches. But so I don't know if the city could look at that to say if we truly do need additional hotels, and if they do, how can you sort of offset those high expenses when you're not really making any money?
Well, it's the chicken or the egg. I've worked in beach resorts where they are dependent 3 to 4 months of the year, and then they make a decision, and that's businesses, do they stay open, do they close down? If you go to Anchorage right now and want to rent a hotel room, it's pretty steep. And then most of the hotels are requiring 3 nights. So I never thought of Anchorage as being totally a resort or something like that. But I know that for any of us who might want to go down there for a weekend, it's quite steep in cost. I'm just outlining, these are the things, obviously we're looking at building more housing, to provide housing for people who may want to live up here and work but they can't get, stable housing. Obviously, if should bring in some more revenues, especially in the sales tax role, if our population can increase. According to the census, we went down a little bit. I've got a business, I got an accountant, I've got someone who's in the airline industry, and I've got a business, major business manager here, and then 3 others. So you've got more, frankly, institutional knowledge of maybe I have, but in trying to grow the revenue pot.
it's a really difficult time right now to talk about increasing fees when our biggest cost, probably our largest costs historically are coming up during this next year. Assuming the price of oil is gonna be as high as what we think it might be. But with that, we are also budgeting to hire an economic development person to maybe help stimulate some economic development and create some possible incentives to have more businesses that would then create more economic development, which will bring in more revenues to the city that way. But our own residents, it seems like we can't necessarily increase our fees any more than we already have. I mean, I don't see how we pull that from our existing population without increasing population. Or providing something more. Kenny?
Well, one thing that could be done that would change a little bit the mix is if you use the utilities power generation, of which there's currently a sales tax. If you eliminated the sales tax and upped the rate by the same 5% you're collecting in sales tax, and then paid that back to the city and pilot, wouldn't that be a model for adding an additional revenue stream that's a little different? It's a little something. You're reducing the sales tax, which might help a few people by changing the tax category, or at least then you're gonna add the extra 5% for the folks that you're not capturing the energy sales tax from that live outside the city limits. So you're expanding the tax base more or less.
Well, my understanding is anybody who lives outside the city does pay a higher fee, but I'm not sure that would be something that John would probably have to address. Typically, anybody who is outside of the municipality, if the municipality is providing power, does pay a higher fee.
Sales tax is charged outside of city limits, I think.
I don't know, I mean, there's,
And utility fees?
I don't know. It could be because it's the situs of taxable transactions, a constituent part is in the city. But with the change in remote sales, there's been a change to where it's delivered typically. So if you, if you don't pay sales tax for something that you buy in, say, Kansas City, and then it's shipped up here, you pay sales tax here.
It's interesting. So the remote sellers issue changed the situs. I had no idea.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And not the utility, I can't speak exactly to it. John will be able to tell you that though.
Yeah. But I think anything we can do to expand the tax base, increase businesses, opportunities to grow, whether it's construction, small business, big business, whatever, anything we can do to make that happen, I think is going to benefit everybody.
And anybody online that just pipe in at any time.
keep my eyes open a little bit, it's hot.
So, Mark,
Yep. Go ahead, Doug, we can hear you.
It seems to me that we always have issues with attempting to raise revenue. We keep talking about tourism and this, and that, and the other. And I think tourism is one of those chicken or egg things. But as far as small business goes, there are, I don't know, 5, 6 probably good opportunities to run small tour businesses. How do we encourage those? We have almost 300 miles of road. There's an outstanding opportunity to have a bicycle tour type of place going on in the summertime. These are not things that are going to bring a lot of money to Nome to begin with. But the totality of them, if there's a way to encourage, let's say, bike tours, bike rentals, fishing programs, Let's say, since right now we have a whole bunch of people who dive offshore, maybe we can have a commercial diving program going on out there. But how do we encourage people to think of these things, and how do we make them so that they're easily administrable and people aren't going, I make $1,000 here and the city wants a chunk of it right away. So how do we build the business before we start trying to take a bunch of money off of it?
I'm here with Councilmember Johnson has to say, and really, everything that we're talking here is we're 1 to 2 years out. And even though we are suffering through high inflation right now, with a good chance we might see a recession somewhere, this is when the time is to start thinking about these ideas and say, okay, what if? Yes, we need to expand our tourism and maybe get back to what it was from what I have been told 15, 20 years ago. Now that we're coming out of the pandemic. But like when we have the Harbor Masters Conference up here, it's going to take every hotel room we've got, plus every B&B, plus staying with friends to accommodate 100 to maybe 120 delegates up here.
There was a time when the chamber ran a convention, or the visitors, a convention, part of the Convention Visitors Bureau, and went out and sought out conventions to come here. And it wasn't necessarily a money maker because it cost the chamber money to do that in order to put these conventions on, but I think it was pretty good for town. We had several of them. If we can encourage more statewide people to come here, such as the Harbor Masters, that's really a good boost for town, especially when it's in the off season, to bring in more revenues, because other revenues come from out of town also.
And I think too, just, a lot of times we talk about economic development, we talk about are the zoning laws and those kinds of things that, either encourage or not encourage, either whether it's construction or business operation or something. So, I know we've talked a lot about Front Street, trying to, make it easier to build things, whether it's residential, whether it's commercial, and making it attractive for people to want to invest, a lot of money. So, from my perspective, the city's role should be about making it easier and more attractive to do any of this kind of stuff. So sorry, I don't have any specifics, but.
Well, and I think the city staff wants to try to figure out how to make it, but we've talked about, and I'm trying to get it done, is to work out rezoning Front Street. It would be a huge step forward instead of allowing commercial and residential space.
Right.
John?
There is a question for you, Mayor.
Okay. That being,
Is sales
The
tax,
question is, go ahead.
is sales tax collected on people who don't live inside the city limits for the
yes, the CITA for the service being delivered is the power plant. Therefore, anybody that is getting something from there, just regardless of the end point to which it's delivered, is charged tax.
Is there an additional fee for being outside corporate limits?
Yes, it's they pay 2 cents more per kilowatt hour.
Mr. Hughes was asking that question.
Yep.
you can expand on that, because I think it has to do also with not collecting property tax on a way of distributing.
Well, just using energy consumption as one method of supplanting, enhancing city revenues by adjusting the amount of the pilot. The other thing that you could perhaps pick up, and I don't know how much of differentiation there is, but anyone that's not currently taxable would pay an increased would pay an increased energy cost. But they wouldn't necessarily be subject to the sales tax. So I'm not sure how many, what that would be.
You're kind of, Ken, parroting the thing that Carl's talked about for 2 or 3 years. Maybe you came up on it on your own, but it's not a new idea.
Sure.
And the idea is that potentially into the rate, and that then the equivalent of the sales tax, the additional added to the pilot, and then as the utility is looking to adjust its rates, calculating that in would result in a lower overall adjustment to those rates by spreading whatever increase the utility may be looking at over the entire base there. So yeah, there is some some discussion. We do have a rate consultant that will be going through the rates here in a couple of months. Sorry, I got to step out again here.
And to sort of add to that, I mean, a lot of people that live in town may not know this, but when we deliver fuel outside of town, outside of city limits, doesn't matter, we're on a road system, we collect sales tax because that whole argument, that citus argument. So, I mean, even though a lot of people that live outside of city limits don't receive the same city services, they're still paying, at least not paying property tax, but they are paying sales tax on what is often households, or at least one of their biggest expenditures, which is fuel. For what that's worth in terms of the utility out of town issue.
Sales tax, that's not a John question, but is sales tax charged to the large nonprofits for utilities?
I don't
I don't think so.
It's always been getting the sales tax exemption.
Okay, so anybody who's on the sales tax exemption also does not pay sales tax on utility charges, right?
That is correct for the facilities that are tax exempt. For instance, Norton Sound pays it on some facilities and not on others. Coherent does the same. So yeah, it's a tax. Utilities are also tax exempt if you exempt, the sales tax exemption. We don't differentiate between whatever service, goods and service they're buying. It's just a blanket.
Mr. Mayor, it's 6:30.
Okay.
Remote control. Oh no. What the hell? It's our TV remote control.
Shit.
Yes, we'll need to go into the meeting here. This probably won't take a long time, so we could actually recess the work session and talk again after if we want to. We'll leave that as an option. Okay, the time is 6:30. The date and time that has been set for the Nome Board of Equalization to hold their fourth meeting. This is to adopt the findings of fact and conclusions of law. Mr. Clerk, you call the roll to establish a quorum.
Councilmember Brown,
I'm here.
Councilmember Henderson,
Here.
Councilmember Doug Johnson,
Here.
Councilmember Mark Johnson,
Here.
Councilmember Martinson,
Here.
Councilmember Topcock,
Bonito.
Youth Representative Ebel,
Okay, turn off the oven, Steve.
Thank you. That brings us to the adoption of the findings and facts and conclusions of law. This is a continuation of the meeting, and at the third session, council member sitting as a BOE commissioner, Topcock, recused herself from participating in the discussions, and I asked, or I'm assuming that that will continue for the vote on the adoption of this. Is that correct?
Sorry, are you asking me? Yeah, I was planning to continue recusing myself.
Yes, okay, thank you. We're not gonna be going, okay, is there a motion to adopt the findings of fact and conclusions of law in the Norton Sound Health Corporation property tax appeals for lot 3 and 4 of block 91, lot 7A of block 127, lot 19 of block 33, lot 1A of block 116, lots 66 and 67 of block 30, and lots 1 and 2 of block 110.
I'll make a motion to adopt the findings of facts and conclusions of law in the North Sound Health Corporation property tax appeals.
Thank you. Mr. Henderson, is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Martinson. These have been circulated. Does the council feel or the board feel that it's necessary to further deliberate on these, or can we simply proceed to a vote? Okay, seeing no indication, and if there is no discussion, Mr. Clerk, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Henderson,
Yes.
Councilmember Doug Johnson,
Yes.
Councilmember Martinson, or Councilmember Mark Johnson,
Yes.
Councilmember Martinson,
Yes.
Councilmember Topcock,
Recusing myself, abstaining.
She's excused from vote.
Councilmember Brown.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. This is the final administrative action of the City of Nome on these appeals. This action may be appealed to the Superior Court, and any such appeal must be filed within 30 days from this date when these findings and conclusions were adopted. There being no further business to come before the 2022 session of the Nome Board of Equalization, I am adjourning. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, we've got 25 minutes before the meeting. Do we want to continue any discussion on the prior work session? Anybody have any other thoughts to come forward? No.
What's wrong with that? Tires.
Doors.
Air conditioned.
Yeah, right.
I'm confused.
That's great.
Well, Sheriff Bryant there.
don't know, I drive that.
Yeah.
That was quite a discussion and, how bad. Could we-
Right. So are we tired of revenue talk at this point, or need to think more about other options? Chuck, you had something to say?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I have a thought, but I won't mention it.
No, go ahead.
No.
Oh my God.
And you may not appreciate what I'm going to say.
Okay.
I'm highly critical of you people.
Okay.
You know, you say you want to hear from the public, but I think you have selective hearing, and maybe you just don't want to hear what some members of the community had for a revenue source. So I'm not going to mention it. I think sometimes it's just a waste of time for a lot of community members to come down and sit through a meeting and in a way we may expect the council to maybe make some advances on suggestions. Yeah. Again, I'm just disappointed with you, gentlemen and lady. Thank you.
Right, well, I'm sorry that you feel we've cut you off. I think at least every time you've been here, I've given you great deference. And we enjoy, not always enjoy, but we do want to hear from people if they do have some suggestions. And
You have not cut me off, Mr. Mayor.
no, that's what I say. I've tried to, I haven't cut anybody off that I'm aware of.
No.
So we would certainly welcome others, if they don't feel comfortable talking in a meeting. There are contact things through email, or they can come in and talk to Bryant, and Bryant will pass them on or set up a meeting with me or someone else.
Thank you.
I think what Chuck is referring to is a potential revenue source that was brought forward at previous meetings.
No comment.
No comment.
Well, maybe you could remind us of what that was.
That would be for the city to potentially have liquor sales, similar to what Kotzebue does, where the city of Kotzebue conducts the liquor sales as opposed to the private industry in the liquor business. And then the city then gains the profits that come from liquor sales as a way to help fund city activities and also build improvements in town.
I think we did have our attorney present, and he said, yes, we can do that. But that also means that we are taking over all alcohol sales in town. That would eliminate all beverage dispensary licenses, close the breakers, close the Polar, the BOT, and all of those. Or the city would, be in that business as well, potentially. And based on that, I did not see any nods around the table that there was any interest in continuing to pursue that when that was the option. That having been said, the legislature, if the governor signed it, did a major rewrite on Title IV, and I have not read it, so I don't know if there's any change in that regard. But we could, city manager shaking his head. But that's where it's at, and so it's all or nothing. It's not selective. Go ahead, Chuck.
In one of my emails that I sent to alcohol board, and a examiner replied back to me. And I think I did send an email to you, and you asked me to, and we agreed to hold off on it before anything was said about it. But in that email, the person said, if the city so chooses to vote by whatever, to make changes to the local options, and if the city chose to operate their own liquor store, but allow private business to operate the bars and restaurants, we could do it.
Okay, well, Glenn, go ahead.
You know, Chuck, when you sent that email, that kind of shocked me in terms of what that individual had said, because it was totally contrary to what our own city solicitor had said. So I then reached out to Sam Severin, who then reached out to the, AMCO, and said that one of their staff had said this to a resident of Nome, and we wondered if there had been some misinterpretation on our part. And I also asked them to respond to you personally. The person made a mistake. The person was relatively new working with AMCO. AMCO is the mayor and I were there at their meeting in Anchorage back in April, has had a tremendous turnover of staff, and this individual was relatively new to the organization, and what she had outlined to you was incorrect. The mayor and I also asked about it, or I asked about it at the meeting we were down in AMCO in Anchorage, and we raised, all the concerns about the problems that we've been having there. And they were concerned, and they were very interested in hearing what the hearing from the 48 people who signed that letter. And they're scheduling, and I thought you had been here for a meeting since then, that they are scheduling a meeting in June. We still don't know when. It is going to be held here in Nome. Typically, they use a small room up at the Aurora Inn, but, we don't think that's going to be large enough for them to have people who participate all across the state on Zoom, people from the city of Nome and everything else. So they're actually scheduling a third meeting here, third day in Nome, where they want to hear from the residents. I think they would be open for the consideration of possibly creating another license step, one that would be bars and restaurants operated by the private sector, and one with stores. I can't promise they're going to do anything. The mayor and I attended that meeting for at least 5 hours when we were down in Anchorage, and they certainly heard about our concerns. So I don't think your request for revenue is done or whatever. It just has to go through a legal process. But remember, AMCO has two ways of doing this. Either they can apply to the legislature with, I'm sure, somebody's approval to change the licenses, or the legislature change the licenses. Now, what changed in this most recent bill, from what I understand, the senator president, it took him 8 to 10 years to get what I think are relatively modest changes for the sale of alcohol in the communities. So this issue has not been lying dormant anywhere, but it gets heavy, then it doesn't get heavy, and right now we're waiting for them to tell us when they're going to be coming in June So we can work with them and make sure there's space for people to voice their suggestions of how alcohol could be controlled in Nome. But I do know in American, they were very concerned with the problems we were having over at AC. You know, the problems that could be happening or starting to see happen a little bit up at Hanson's. Unfortunately, when they show up here, it's going to be when camp is open, and they may not get the full impact that we certainly see in the winter months. But they were open to these discussions. So I didn't know they had not gotten back to you on that response. I wasn't expecting it copied, but I thought you would have gotten responded to.
And make one short comment?
Yeah, I just was gonna say that, so far they've scheduled June 28th, but I don't know if that's what day of the week that is, Brian?
That's when I'll be out of town.
June 28th is
Wednesday, I think, or Tuesday.
it's Tuesday.
Okay, so I don't know if they're coming in Monday and Tuesday or Tuesday and Wednesday. But they did say they were gonna have one day add-on to the meeting, just to talk about, and hear, what, the community had to say, for their problems and their suggestions in dealing with alcohol.
Yeah, one
So
day.
June 28th.
One day of their meeting will be alcohol, the second day is typically cannabis, and, you know, we'll find out, and once we get a firm date. But that was the promise they made to the mayor and I when we were there.
He sat in on the meeting and listened to both of you. I was very happy with your comments. I think they were outstanding. Then I sat a bit longer to address the board. And I presented to them what I presented to you folks on. And the chairman of the board thought it was a good question. And he said they would check into it. My memory is right. So I guess if they don't check into it, let me know prior to them coming up, and I will question them again. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll take a 10-minute stretch your feet break so I can eat my pilot bread and Spam. The pizza just did not sound good. Sorry, I could have brought this for everybody. Next time.
Brian worked really hard. He walked the pizza down here.
Oh, bless your heart, Brian.
Taking a nap back there?
You taking a nap back there?
Oh,
You had a Mountain Dew.
that's all right. You earned it, man.
Quick question for clarification. Is the economic development person settled?
That's in the budget. If the council passes the budget, then it's a resolved issue unless
What's that?
economic development,
Oh,
assistant city manager. I moved it over to the right location.
I saw the change, thank you.
But he or she is still gonna be the lead for economic development.
But that person has been hired?
No,
Okay.
I don't hire anybody until I get permission from the
It's a new
council.
position and that's in the budget.
It's in
To
the
hire.
budget.
after July 1.
After July 1, okay. Wait, they've been talking about not having one for a while. Do they have one? Did I miss that they got one? No, okay.
we'll just put money forward to actually do it.
I guess I'm gonna go back to Neil's and say we gotta find an older vehicle.
I find one up on blocks.
There you go. Somebody had a picture of an overturned one down here on Beam Road.
Well, I've had a couple of them roll on, Raffle Highway.
Already?
Well, they had them roll a couple times in the, winter.
Oh,
I don't know how that, I don't know, one, how the guy even walked, or Dal walked away from it. It was,
I thought you meant rolled like the spring or summer.
well,
There was a roll of sweetness, right?
I don't know. Well,
Sunday there was something down there.
Well,
Came back from camp, there was an ambulance and every guy in his truck was hauling balls down that way.
well, the question is, how do you define spring here?
It's over.
Yeah, this is summer.
Summer now.
Vaguely reminiscent of last year when we had like 2 weeks of warm weather and it was gone.
So enjoy it.
Yeah.
Bust this meeting out in 20 minutes.
Such an optimist.
You won't get any delays on me, man.
Let's move it all into a consent agenda and knock it out at once.
So this is house painting weather right now.
I know, it's, yeah.
Wrap all the budget together stuff, one,
You don't have to
hearing
for
for
the
the,
public hearings?
Nope.
That's for second reading, right?
Only on second reading of the.
Oh, ordinance.
giving Adam all sorts of suggestions.
I'm glad he wrote that substitute. Soup lot.
Well, I don't know if it's as much a substitute as a correction,
Well, just instead of doing one after another, it's already in there. So I appreciate that.
We had a good cleanup at the dump. So
People show up for that.
there was, I wasn't keeping track because I just came out to help, but it seemed at any one time we had, 18 to 24 vehicles there.
Wow, no kidding. That's awesome.
Fourth graders out there earlier in the week, and I've heard numbers of it putting bags. I don't know how full the bags are, 'cause I don't expect
No matter.
fourth grader to be hauling around a big bag.
Great. That's good. Heard it looks a lot better.
Well, the back truck we're trying to get that fixed. We need a new starter on it, and the starter is supposed to come in finally today. I don't know, but I don't know if it's in yet.
You a bunch of little sharp sticks. You don't have to bend over.
Well, let me put it this way, did bend overs for an hour and I felt it later in the day.
Oh,
But, it wasn't just plastic bags, it was, wet wipes, it was face masks. It was, bags that would normally hold salty snacks like potato chips and everything else. It was Subway things, it was, I don't know where the styrofoam, who's getting stuff in styrofoam, but there were styrofoam containers there and everything else.
Restaurants for takeout. Do the styrofoam stuff.
Most of them have moved away. They've, gone to more of a plastically type of you cannot get rid of.
There was a bunch of shrink wrap too.
Oh, I bet. We put a lot of that into the landfill. Aaron here does. Raven, everybody, Ryan,
Yeah,
I mean. I wish there was a better way to wrap those pallets, so it's just straight all plastic. All that bypass that comes through when we break them down and put them in airplanes.
Yep.
Kind of tough for you guys to go plastic free.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's so much plastic.
Well, there were packing straps out there too.
Our store, our Outfitters and Express is going plastic bag free June 1. So.
I didn't get out there about 1:30.
Yeah.
I was done by then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are you gonna offer instead of?
We had I think this was from a shareholder meeting. We haven't had in-person meetings for a couple of years, so we've got some of those. And Scott, some paper bags. A lot of people don't want them just because they're not buying a lot of stuff typically there, but sometimes.
What are you doing?
Paper bags and then use the totes.
We're gonna be participating tomorrow
So
with the Air Force.
it's a start.
Certainly.
What a wonderful opportunity.
Oh, just so.
When I was in college,
So,
picking up trash
by
on
the time they're coming in,
any part-time job. I learned real quick that if you take a broomstick,
Alright. maybe we'll
tape a nail or a screw or something to it,
Question for you.
no, it's a lot easier on the back and the knees, and you're doing it all day long. Now, now would be essential.
Oh, I'm not, Kelly's out of town. I was gonna
Yeah.
email Teresa, and then I forgot. I just got busy today, but I only know that one
Just
vehicle.
drive a cage and clean up an area, then you know, is it in order?
And I've heard nothing about.
You start doing stuff.
Yeah, we
Something.
ordered 2 in November and 1 in December.
There we go.
Never mind, I'm done. See your similar.
Yeah. Trying to keep it going, man.
I hope so.
Go.
So how many camps got hit on the yacht club?
I know of two. I'm hoping on a third one. No,
I suppose not.
I don't leave too much behind them. We're just up the bend from town.
I've heard it
Half mile.
pretty rough, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Can we hold class outside?
I got 2 red pens, let me see.
Here, no, I think I got.
And I was gonna check back with Cheryl to see whether I just walked away with that agreement with DOT on Stedman, or if I had actually signed another copy of it. But I found that after our meeting last week in a folder.
I also, sent you on the 3D thing, then we're gonna brief the council too.
Okay,
That's gonna take a work session.
yep, okay.
You have to wear like those special glasses when you're inside them.
You know, I was, to get to sleep, being I don't have television, I look at TikTok. And I came across one 3-minute thing where they were 3D printing houses somewhere else. I mean, it didn't give a whole lot of the deal, but they were starting to lay the foundation on the thing. The thing ran out and said World War II, and I didn't.
Fell asleep?
Yeah.
You can find anything on TikTok.
little late.
Good evening.
Hey, we did the BOE and adopted the findings and we'll sign them after the meeting and put on the record the last statement on there about the final administrative action and appeal to the court. So we'll see where that takes us.
Okay,
Thank you for the work on that.
you're welcome.
Okay, whenever you're ready, Bryant.
Councilmember Brown,
Here.
Councilmember Henderson,
Here.
Councilmember Doug Johnson,
Here.
Councilmember Mark Johnson,
Here.
Councilmember Martinson,
Here.
Councilmember Topcock,
Manit Dunga.
Youth Representative Hebel. We have a
He's
quorum.
at scholarship night.
Oh, yes.
All right, excused. Thank you for that. Okay, and this is Monday, May 23, 2022, the regular meeting of the Nome Common Council. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Make a motion.
Second.
Councilmember Henderson, Councilmember Martinson, any discussion? Roll call, please.
Councilmember Henderson,
Yes.
Councilmember Doug Johnson,
Yes.
Councilmember Mark Johnson,
Yes.
Councilmember Martinson,
Yes.
Councilmember Topcock,
EE.
Councilmember Brown.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Moving on to approval of minutes, April 25, 2022, regular meeting. Is there a motion to adopt these minutes?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you.
Second.
Councilmember Henderson, Councilmember Martinson. If there are no noted additions, deletions, or corrections other than ministerial, ask for the roll to be called.
Councilmember Doug Johnson,
Yes.
Councilmember Mark Johnson,
Yes.
Councilmember Martinson,
Yes.
Councilmember Topcock,
EE.
Councilmember Brown,
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. That brings us, oh, I'm sorry, we had May 9 too. I should have combined that. Our May 9th, 2022 Common Council regular meeting. Is there a motion on those?
I'll make the motion.
Second.
Councilmember Henderson, Councilmember Martinson, roll call please.
Councilmember Mark Johnson,
Yes.
Councilmember Martinson,
Yes.
Councilmember Topcock,
EE.
Councilmember Brown,
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson,
Yes.
Councilmember Doug Johnson.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. That moves us on to communications and letter in the packet from John Bachman expressing frustration with property tax assessment and exemption process and requesting that improvements and amendments to the property taxes chapter be made. He has a long dissertation here having to do with some improvements that he made. Initially, he did file an appeal. That appeal was resolved with the assessor, and the suggestion is that our process isn't working, and asking that we amend the code or provide instructions on how to file appeal, the role and responsibilities of city staff and assessor.
Is that last question? Did he get his appeal resolved?
He, yes, both times the appeal was resolved. He signed off on the appeal. Yet after Board of Equalization was convened and adjourned, he had other issues. He and his significant other had other issues. I'm equally frustrated with the situation between those two.
Okay, Thank you. Next communication is from Governor Dunleavy, talking about the sharp and tragic surge in drug overdose deaths. Mr. Manager, don't you participate in something on this?
I serve on the governor's statewide opioid commission. We meet, and obviously this has been a concern. And a lot of the, frankly, issues right now are how to take the $50-some million settlement that we anticipate getting and making it effective and possibly creating a trust where it would continue to pay dividends after just taking a straight line approach in spending the money. But this is a growing issue. It is far worse, I hate to say, in the lower 48. It was far worse from where I had worked before I came up here, and I understand the impact. And I know the police chief and I talk about it on a regular basis, but it's kind of, the message is these drugs are out there and they're tainted with fentanyl, and it's strong enough that it can kill you. So please don't use opioids. As we all know, this got started by the overprescribing of opioids by doctors, and the money that is coming from this settlement from the pharmaceutical companies that have settled across the United States. But the impact is far greater than the number that is being paid out through the settlement. So, and obviously we know that we have challenges up here with alcohol. We do have some fentanyl up here in opioids, but it's worse in some of the communities further south in Alaska.
Yeah, and beside heroin, both into this.
There's the GCI working tonight.
Thank you for catching that up.
Stand at ease, a new term I saw repeatedly. Hey, no.
There's it shows a little camera on that.
We got to figure out a better way to make that work. It's like taking your life in your hands, getting up there.
With a harness.
Yeah.
It's also
3-point, what is that, 3-point contact or whatever?
Thank you, Brian.
Okay, come back to the session, talking about communications again. Next is the budget calendar. And we have our first reading tonight, as well as many setting the mill rate, etc. Second reading June 13th. City Hall cleanup flyer, May 31st to June 3rd is the spring you call we haul, and on June 4th is Raffle Day, a organized day for encouraging everybody to get out and collect some bags and bring them in for free hot dogs and pop and chance at getting in a bike raffle. Also, again, a reminder that Coeric is running a e-waste program, and that is Friday, June 3rd and Saturday, June 4th. That's the end of the communications. Are there members of the public that would like to address the council this evening? Seeing no indication, there will be another opportunity later in the meeting. Moving on to unfinished business. First item is Ordinance 220501. Is there a motion to read this? Oh, I guess we read it regardless? By title?
022-0501, an ordinance of the Nome City Council, Nome, Alaska, amending the Nome Code of Ordinances, section 17.20.020 to provide for a temporary exemption from property tax for deteriorated structures located in a designated area of Nome that are being substantially rehabilitated, renovated, and replaced.
Thank you. And incidentally, I did find in the minutes of past meetings that it used to be my way, and I'm not sure who changed it or why, but ask the attorney about that and maybe change it back. Okay.
I'm looking through, I found in 2002, that was your way as well.
Okay. It has confused me since I've been back here. Is there a motion to adopt ordinance 220501?
I'll make the motion to adopt ordinance 220501.
Call point of order.
Oh, thank you. My way. Yeah, my way again.
Long meeting.
Feel free to join.
Yeah, it's at the public safety building.
She was ready.
All right, the council stand in public recess to take public testimony on ordinance 220501. Are there members of the public that wish to address this ordinance this evening?
Thought she was coming in to do that.
Seeing no indication, in and out of public hearing at 7:13. Now, is there a motion to adopt ordinance 220501?
Now I will make the motion to adopt ordinance 22-05-01.
Thank you. Second. Councilmember Henderson, Councilmember Mark Johnson. Brings us to discussion. At this point, a substitute ordinance has been prepared after a work session that was held here a week ago. I walked out, unfortunately, to another meeting before this all got put together. Was this substitute ordinance generally agreed to?
Well, I don't know if I would call it a substitute as much as an amended. And this was amended, it was agreed upon, not voted on, but no one seemed to object to it because you can't vote in a work session. Brooks was here also participating as you know, and Brooks took the thoughts to amend the ordinance for its second reading.
Okay,
May I ask Brooks if I'm interpreting that correctly? Brooks?
Yes, what I did after listening to the work session was try to take all of the ideas that were expressed for changes to the draft that had been before the council at the work session and incorporate them into a single document. The concept being that that document could, by way of one motion to amend, be in fact substituted for the ordinance that's on the floor before you. And if everyone agreed to amend the ordinance by replacing it with the substitute, then all of the changes could be accomplished by a single motion. But if that was not the will of the body, then by preparing something that highlighted all of the changes, you could make a series of amendments and vote one by one on the various changes.
So if the majority of these, rather than have about 10 amendments or 6 amendments to the ordinance, I'm going to ask for a motion to amend by substitution and in the place of the ordinance, that it be amended by the one indicated as 220501 parens S. Is there a motion to substitute.
So I'll make the motion to approve ordinance number 0-22-05-01. Yes.
It's,
I'll make a motion to second his amendment of changing the first motion to the S motion. Yes?
no, it doesn't change the first.
No,
Well,
amend
yeah.
the first.
Right. So the motion on the floor is to, by Councilmember Henderson and Councilmember Mark Johnson, is to amend by substitution the ordinance as outlined on pages 34, 35, and 36. So then if there are changes to this, where only one part might go out, we can do that by substitution, by amendment to the amendment. So roll call on the amendment, please.
Councilmember Topgach,
EE.
Councilmember Brown,
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson,
Yes.
Councilmember Doug Johnson,
Yes.
Councilmember Mark Johnson,
Yes.
Councilmember Martinson.
Yes.
Motion to amend carries.
Thank you. So we are now dealing with 0-22-05-01S. Is there any discussion on this? Any amendments to be proposed to this?
No, I have a clarification. I just wanted to.
Okay, please, Councilman.
So thank you, Brooks, for putting this together. I think it basically covered all the issues that I recall that we talked about in the work session. One clarification, I think it's okay, but I just wanted to run it by under the exclusions of the under the temporary seasonal use structures and then owner occupied structures. And this goes for both ordinances, one with the new development and one for the deteriorated buildings. I want to just make sure that the owner occupancy exclusion would not count for, say, a triplex where the owner lives in one and rents two out, or a similar situation where somebody has a house and they built a mother-in-law apartment and they're obviously living in the same building. And I believe this one's okay because the tax exemption would only apply to the rental units, the ones being rented, or in a mother-in-law apartment case, it would only apply to the new added mother-in-law apartment. So am I interpreting that correctly, Brooks?
Actually, no, the scope of the exemption is not limited to one portion of a multi-dwelling unit structure that is renovated. I'm having difficulty envisioning a structure qualifying as dilapidated if in fact it's being lived in by an owner, but I did hear the city manager say at the last work session that actually is in fact the case. So I suppose theoretically you could run into this situation, but the ordinance as drafted does not limit the exemption to a portion of a property that's being rehabilitated. It applies to the entire property. So this there'd be some additional work or amendments that would need to be done to the ordinance if in fact the intent in a multi-dwelling unit situation is to limit the exemption to the what I guess would be the increase in assessed value following completion of the renovation. So you would in effect have to amend this ordinance to adopt the language about the amount of the exemption that appears in the economic development optional exemption as subsection D2. So you would have to amend this ordinance to add a section that reads the amount of an exemption and would say an exemption under this section only exempts the incremental increase in assessed value of the property as determined in the first tax year after issuance of a certificate of occupancy or a conditional certificate of occupancy under section 510.060 of the code. And if that amendment was desired, it would become a new subsection subsection I. That would be the easiest way to do it without renumbering everything of this particular ordinance. So hopefully you're following me, but the fact is this ordinance, the exemption under this ordinance is much broader than simply a exemption on an incremental increase in value resulting from an improvement.
Yeah, I did follow the argument, and I just want to make sure, and I'll just, for simplicity, I will use the mother-in-law apartment example. Somebody that adds on an apartment to their house, obviously the existing house as assessed would not be excluded from taxes. However, the additional value associated with the creation of the new rental unit would be exempt from property tax. So if that does, to allow that to occur, if we need to add an additional section to cover that situation, then I would like to do that.
Okay, so that then would be from page 43D. The language amount of exemption, an exemption under this section only exempts the incremental increase in assessed value of the property is determined in the first tax year after issuance of a certificate of occupancy or conditional certificate of occupancy under section 5.10.060 of this code. I'd like to suggest that the motion for that amendment and the leave to the clerk to work with the attorney to renumber, because just adding that at the end doesn't seem like it's really the right place when we compare other ordinances. Probably should go in between, C and D or something like that. So if we just move the amendment and allow the clerk to get it in the right place and renumber as necessary.
And before I just want to, I think the point that you made initially, Brooks, was that the most likely scenario with a dilapidated building is you're going to be repurposing the entire building, not just a portion of it. Was that your thought? And we don't really potentially need that incremental valuation clause put into the dilapidated ordinance like we already have in the economic development ordinance. Was that your point, Brooks?
Yes, I tried in this ordinance to reflect the discussion of the council, so it wasn't me saying that necessarily that this wasn't needed, but the discussion at the work session seemed to focus on the fact that we're talking about dilapidated buildings here, and so slapping on an apartment to an already dilapidated building would not seem to be within the intent of this ordinance. It would more appropriately fit the economic development exemption, because if you still end up with a half dilapidated building with a brand new apartment, I'm not sure the public good has been advanced in the way council intends with the ordinance. But how large the exemption should be is a complete policy decision for the city council to make. So If you wanted to exempt the entire value of the property, that's kind of how it's worded now. But if you only wanted to exempt an increase in value, then this amendment that we discussed would need to be made.
Thank you. I would like to recognize Councilmember Doug Johnson.
So that was kind of the point I was getting to. We talk about an incremental increase in or decrease in tax. It seems to me if we want to encourage people to do something to residences that are already there or just to build additionally, we would put the whole structure under the reduced tax for the duration of the exemption rather than just a portion of it, because I can't see where that really makes it worth your time to build something on there. It can't be that great of a savings.
I actually, after thinking about it and listening to Brooks, I think I don't feel a need to modify this particular ordinance differently from the way it's already written. I agree that it's very unlikely that somebody would, take a dilapidated building and only add on a part of it as an improvement and not the rest of it. And so I'm fine with the ordinance the way it's written. Thanks, Brooke, for the explanation.
Okay, so are there other amendments or further discussion on ordinance letter S as presented? Okay, if not, call for a roll call, please, on the adoption of ordinance 220501. Yes.
Councilmember Martinson. Yes. Councilmember Topcock.
EE.
Councilmember Brown.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Doug Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mark Johnson.
Yes.
Motion as amended carries.
Thank you. That moves us to ordinance 220502. Mr. Clerk.
0220502, an ordinance amending chapter 5.10 of the Nome Code of Ordinances to exempt projects which qualify for an economic development property tax exemption or a dilapidated property tax exemption from permit fees.
Thank you. The council stand in recess to take public testimony on this ordinance. Are there members of the public that would like to address this? See no indication, in and out of public hearing at 7:29. Is there a motion to adopt ordinance 220502?
I'll make a motion to adopt ordinance 22-05-02.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Councilmember Henderson, Councilmember Mark Johnston. Is there any discussion with regard to this ordinance? Councilmember Henderson.
Mr. Mayor, so in the work session, we talked about using this not only for the purpose of exempting permit fees like building permits and all the permits associated with construction, but also with utility fees. And the reason that I had talked about utility fees, I'd already made the decision at the last work session not to essentially try to utilize utility credits on the utility budget after discussion at the work session. But I looked at a situation where the city would reimburse the utilities for any credits that were credited. Again, my suggestion or recommendation was that we apply utility credits worth $100 per month per new rental unit created up for a period of 5 years. I had requested that we use the utility credits process because that was an easy way, or at least that I thought, to apply that incentive to the owner. I have since modified that, and after conversations with other council members in which that I would like to apply credits for the first 5 years of the project, similar to utility credits, but we do it completely on the city side, don't include the utilities, and essentially fund it similar to a utility credit where we, once a year, we credit, the owner of a triplex for each one of his units. So I'm sorry for making that complicated, but I just wanted to make sure that that was the process and there was enough support to do that. Otherwise, I won't request a modification to the ordinance.
I'm going to suggest that would be an item to be included in the city's budget. And then the process, how it's to be applied, then be passed along administratively. It doesn't need to amend.
Does it need to go through the ordinance process?
Well, I mean, it would go through the ordinance process just through the budget. I don't think it needs to go through this or any other.
Mr. Mayor, we would have to have some documentation, whether it be a resolution or something that when we are doing this, a guidance to our auditors also. I don't know, and whether we want to work on this after the budget is passed and then amend the budget, but in December, because I don't know how much construction is going to take place between now and December.
This, even if the council passed this and supported it, it wouldn't really be paid until next year at the earliest when the actual ordinance takes effect. So it's certainly nothing that has to be done now, and I don't want to muddy up the process with this ordinance. So I don't have any recommended changes.
Okay. Any further discussion? Roll call, please, on its adoption. Ordinance 220502.
Councilmember Brown,
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson,
Yes.
Councilmember Doug Johnson,
Yes.
Councilmember Mark Johnson,
Yes.
Councilmember Martinson,
Yes.
Councilmember Topcock. Motion carries.
Thank you. That brings us to item C. Ordinance 220503. Mr. Clerk, would you read that by title?
O 220503, an ordinance of the Nome City Council, Nome, Alaska, amending the Nome Code of Ordinances, section 17.20.020 to provide for partial temporary exemption from property tax for economic development property developed for multi-unit residential housing.
Thank you. The time is 7:34. Council stand in recess to take public testimony on this ordinance. Are there members of the public that would like to address this ordinance this evening? Seeing no indication, the council come back into this regular session of 7:35. Is there a motion to adopt ordinance 220503?
Yes.
Thank you. Is there a second? Second. Thank you. Councilmember Henderson and Councilmember Mark Johnson. Okay, similar to the 1-2 back that was discussed in a work session, the attorney has provided a substitute for consideration that has a number of changes to it. And so I'm going to ask for, is there a motion to amend this ordinance to put 220503S in its place?
I'll make the motion to amend the ordinance to put 22-05-03S in its place.
Thank you. Is there a second? Second. Councilmember Henderson, Councilmember Mark Johnson. Discussion then will center around 220503, letter S. Is there any discussion with regard to this ordinance and the changes? I'm not seeing any indication. So, Mr. Clerk, would you call the roll on the amendment?
Councilmember Doug Johnson.
Let's stop.
Yes.
Let's stop a second. Let me back up. Apparently, Councilman Brown was trying to find the hand button. Go ahead, Councilmember Brown.
Yeah, so I'm a little bit confused by what you just said. So what we're voting on right now is the amendment that would put the substitute in place of the original ordinance, correct? We're not passing the substitute, or we're just voting on the amendment. We're not voting on passage of the new ordinance.
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, proceed with the roll call, please.
On the amendment, Councilmember Doug Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mark Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Martinson.
Yes.
Councilmember Topcock.
EE.
Councilmember Brown.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Motion to amend carries.
Thank you. So ordinance 220503S is on the table. Is there any discussion with regard to this document? Councilmember Brown.
Yeah. So I'm assuming that Councilmember Henderson will address the owner occupied issue, similar to what the discussion was earlier on the other ordinance that it didn't apply to, because currently he's correct that if you build an eightplex, you live in one of the 8 units, you don't get the property tax exemption on any of the 8. The other thing that I'd like to address is the other direction, to where someone builds a structure that incidentally includes a rental unit, but none of the property is owner occupied and none of the property is short-term rentals. I would not want to see the property tax exemption extended to the entirety of that structure, if there's only a small incidental portion of it that's used for a residential rental unit. And I'm not sure if I'm being really clear as to what I'm saying, but so I'll give you an example, and that's to where I could build an office building or a warehouse or a equipment repair shop and put a small rental unit in that building and then claim a credit for the entire cost of the incremental cost of the structure. And I could also see someone playing games a little bit and making the rents relatively expensive on that small unit, so it's not ever actually occupied, but it is offered for rent. So I'm not sure how to phrase an amendment, but possibly Brooks could assist with that.
Brooks, or Doug, Councilmember Johnson, are you trying to put your hand up?
Only to the extent that I agree with Gerald 100% on that.
Okay, thank you. Brooks, you heard the comment there. Can you explain to us, based on this ordinance, whether how this ordinance impacts the examples that Councilmember Brown provided?
Yes, I can. Starting with the owner occupied, if you look at section 2B 2 of the substitute ordinance, it is true that as currently written, an owner occupant that adds rental units to their structure is not eligible for the tax exemption, which may not be what is intended. So if that result is not intended, the motion would be to delete subsection subsection B2, so that exclusion would be eliminated. With regard to the rent being so high, the structure was not occupied, that is already covered because there's a portion of this ordinance, and it is subsection E3 that require all the units in a new or renovated building to be occupied as rental residential housing. So you could get into an argument that, you know, all units only means all dwelling units and not the entire building. But so if you wanted to avoid that, the qualification criteria or the exclusion criteria under subsection B would read, you would add something that says, you know, a mixed use structure, which means any structure that is not 100% residential property does not qualify, or is not eligible for this tax exemption. So, you know, where in that universe you'd want to draw the line, I'm not sure, but you certainly could draw it at, if any part of the structure is used for anything other than residential housing, you're not going to get a break on property tax. You could draw it there, or you could, you know, kind of revert back to the very initial draft, which required more than one residential dwelling unit to be constructed in order to qualify for the exemption. But as it's worded right now, you could have an argument with somebody that built an office and added an apartment to it as to whether or not that qualified.
So this is Gerald. I don't think we need to go all the way one direction or the other, but if there was a way to say that the in the case of a multi-purpose building, the exemption will be prorated to only pertain to that portion of the building that is used for rental residential housing.
Yeah, that could be accomplished with adding a subsection D3 that addresses the amount of the exemption.
D3.
Are you making that amendment, Gerald?
Well, let's hear Brooks' verbalize it again?
Sure, the language of D3 would then read, an exemption under this section only exempts, and subsection 3 would be for a mixed-use building, only that portion of the incremental increase in assessed value that is attributed to the additional residential portion of the structure.
And I so move.
Okay, let's make sure first off that could you read back, Mr. Clerk, what you captured?
For a mixed-use building, only that portion that is attributed to a residential portion of the building. I missed something.
Okay, I think an exemption under this section only exempts was what was first said.
Yep.
Okay.
And the word rental needs to be in there also. Rental residential.
Okay, so clerk, please read that back one more time.
Okay, subsection D, amount of exemption, and exemption under this section only exempts 3, for a mixed-use building, only that portion that is attributed for a rental residential portion of the building.
Brooks, is that what you said?
Not exactly, because I referenced the portion of the increase, the incremental increase in assessed value of the property that is attributed to the residential use of the building.
Okay, at the end of the meeting, when Mr. K&OM sends us the transcript, we'll know exactly what was said, but.
Well,
We'll work on it right now to just make sure we got it right before we have it moved.
Sure.
For a mixed-use building, only that portion of the incremental increased portion of assessed value that is attributed for a rental residential portion of the building.
Are we close, Brooks?
Yeah, I think that gets the intent of what Councilmember Brown was expressing and would be enforceable if that language is used and this ordinance is amended by adding that subsection.
Okay, so that will be III, section 3, under that.
Second.
So who was the first?
Gerald.
Oh, thank you. Councilmember Brown, you're happy with that?
I am.
Okay. Seconded by Councilmember Mark Johnson. Is there discussion on the amendment to the amendment? Seeing no indication, a roll call, please.
Councilmember Mark Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Martinson.
Yes.
Councilmember Tepcock. Councilmember Brown.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Doug Johnson.
Yes.
Motion to amend carries.
Thank you. Just to make sure we've got this right, I had bracketed B2 as something that was discussed for deletion. Is that? Not necessary by the addition in D? Or do they, are they in conflict? Addressing that to Brooks?
That may have applied. That was that part of the earlier discussion about partial owner occupied structure that also included rentals?
I believe that is, but Brooks,
Yeah, this would not be in conflict with the just adopted amendment, which applied to mixed-use buildings. This particular exclusion makes ineligible the situation where somebody adds a rental unit onto a building that they are living in. So, and if that's not really what's intended, then the motion would simply be to delete this subsection from the ordinance. If that was done, then somebody that owned a house and was living in it and built on an apartment would qualify for the exemption, the amount of which would be limited to the increased value attributed to the improvement. So, which primarily would be the apartment, I assume.
okay, so is there an amendment to be proposed? Okay, Councilmember Mark Johnson has a question, and then we got some hands.
And
Go ahead.
Brooks, is that, in the example of somebody constructing a triplex and living in one of the units? Does that take care of that situation?
That structure would, if this exclusion was deleted from the ordinance, that situation would now qualify for an exemption, an economic development exemption.
For the entire structure?
Yes.
Okay, Councilmember Doug Johnson.
So it seems to me that we are attempting here to encourage people to build more rental space. So just because you happen to have if you build more space than you need so you can put somebody else in there, that should not exempt you from being able to, it shouldn't prevent you from taking the tax exemption, in my opinion. And it also, in my opinion, I would make it worth their time and extend it to the entire structure. If it's, say I already have a building and I build a second building or an addition onto it. Again, we're trying to create more space and we're trying to give people reasons to create more space, which will eventually also increase our revenues.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Brown.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if you've got a triplex that is, or fourplex that's one unit is owner occupied and the other three are rented out, would that not qualify as a multi-use or multi-purpose building? So the amendment that we just passed would cover it, and we would still delete this one section that the attorney pointed out.
Brooks, can you tell us the impact of that? Brooks, if you're there, can you tell us the impact of that? Tying these, does that prior amendment adding 3 take care of what's being proposed?
Sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. I'm going to look at the zoning code to figure out if you differentiate between multi-unit and single-family residential structures in your zoning code.
While you're looking that up, I think the question was whether it would qualifies under a multi-use situation where the two uses, it sounds like from a movie. Two uses are primary residence in one use, and rental property as a second use.
Yeah, the zoning code doesn't quite distinguish between those. It uses a single family dwelling, which is a, standalone one unit type structure, and it uses a multiple family dwelling. So they would not be considered two separate uses. If you have a triplex, it's considered one use, a multiple family dwelling use. So that situation is not covered by the recently adopted amendment.
So, is the fix to that to still delete B2 and add another section back in? Or modify section 2?
If you delete D2, you end up with the entire triplex, including the unit occupied by the owner, as being eligible for the exemption. If you didn't want that to be the case, you would change, you would have another amendment to the amount of exemption. So that this one would be subsection D 4, and it would be and that would read: an exemption under this section only exempts the incremental increase in assessed value of the property as determined in the first tax year after issuance of a certificate of occupancy or conditional certificate of occupancy under section 510-060 of this code that is attributable to those units in a multifamily dwelling unit that are occupied by persons other than the property owner. Which, it's kind of a mouthful, I realize, but that would yield a result in which if somebody built a new triplex and lived in one of the units, only the 2 additional rental units that were added to the supply of long-term rental housing would qualify for the exemption, and the owner-occupied unit would not.
Okay, so that would be a D that adds some verbiage that hopefully we got that goes in front, and then basically is parroting the language in 2, and then has something after that again. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Mr. Mayor, may I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Manager.
I think sometimes maybe I'm looking at this in too much of a simplified manner. But what if we had a sentence in there that if a property is redeveloped and a portion of it is occupied by the owner, or whatever term you use, that portion of the property is not eligible for the tax credit. Something real plain and simple, so that if someone wants to develop a triplex, say a triplex costing $900,000, $300,000 would not be eligible if it was owner occupied.
Member Brown.
I like that idea. So, and it appears to me like instead of just straight out deleting exclusions item 2, so B2, that's where you would change it to the portion of a structure that is occupied by the owner. Instead of the entire structure, you're just saying the portion that's owner occupied does not create eligibility for this tax exemption.
Okay, Councilmember Doug Johnson, and next.
Okay, so why would we take the owner's portion out? They're the ones taking the risk in this.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah, the reason
Go ahead.
the reason is that. Sorry.
Go ahead, Councilmember Brown.
Okay. The reason that we would take the owner occupied portion out is the same reason that we are not including owner occupied structures in general. And that's that this is a more narrowly construed or directed ordinance to address rental housing and not owner occupied housing. And the more extreme example of that is what Councilmember Henderson brought up earlier, and that's the mother-in-law apartment. So you build a new house for $500,000-$600,000, which isn't hard to do in today's economy. You put a $50,000 portion of that as a mother-in-law apartment, which you rent out to the general public, and then you take a tax exemption for the entire value of the structure, thereby taking a detour around the fact that we did not intend for any of this to be applied to owner-occupied structures.
Well, I would argue that we're still creating more housing space, which is the primary concern here.
Okay, so I wonder if we should Councilmember Henderson, you are indicating?
I think Gerald's point is valid. I think what Gerald's referring to is a case where somebody builds a 4,000 square foot house, adds a small mother-in-law apartment on it, and claims the entire property as exemption. And I think that's the issue that Gerald's trying to avoid. I think the issue that Doug speaks to is somebody builds a fourplex, all of them are the same size apartment, wants to live in one and manage the rest of them, and we don't give that as an exemption. I guess I don't want to discourage anybody from doing it, but I think I'm not sure what the solution is where we can capture both of those concerns.
Okay, Councilmember Mark Johnson.
I thought we kind of discussed that during the work session to not muddle up the break for creating more residential property, that we bring up the owner occupied potential incentives at a future time and not be part of this rental situation.
Good point.
Okay, anybody else here before we let Councilmember Johnson? Go ahead, Doug.
I just don't think there's going to be a rush of people going out building big houses just to put a little teeny small apartment on it to get the tax break. I think it's worth the risk.
Thank you. Well, there are so many different things in this discussion. I'm not going to ask Brooks to answer every one of them. But Councilmember Brown, did you feel strongly about making any change?
Well, I mean, if we don't make any change at all, then the way the ordinance reads is that any structure that's even partially owner occupied is ineligible. So I mean, I don't believe that was the intent of the council.
And the part that I heard, well, it was the prior ordinance, but I mean, that seemed to be what was resonating to me, but.
Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Mr. Manager.
When you were having this discussion last time, I should say, I think it was decided that you would come back and look at single-family housing and maybe, to encourage homes to be built. Maybe that may be the avenue to take into consideration, because the original discussion was how do we encourage more rental housing? How do we encourage developers? And the goal was with these 3 ordinances to make that possible. But I think it was the sense of the council that they wanted to see what we could do for, let's say someone's a first-time home buyer and wants to have some rental income to help cover the mortgage. And you see that happening if you watch any of the home improvement shows. So maybe that we need to come back as a community or as a council, and you come back and look at that and continue this discussion, because I can tell you, we're going to start hanging so many ornaments on this Christmas tree. It's just going to get a lot more difficult to manage. And I think it's got to be as clear and simple as possible so people are not interpreting something into it.
Just because we passed this one in this form, dealing with this condition, doesn't mean that we can't amend something out of this again in the next action. So I kind of like that idea of no more amendments.
Except for B2, if we leave that in there, that makes triplex that is owner occupied in one section make the whole thing not eligible, correct?
At least probably for this moment until we develop either another ordinance or amendment. I mean, I think the issue is to allow those who are looking for rental, investors or whatever for rental property development, to get that started. And then there's the second phase, helping people build a home and possibly have a rental unit as part of it. And you might be trying to do too much as a body with one fell swoop. I agree. I guess that's where my recommendation to you all is at this point.
And if we find, and if we pass this ordinance without any amendments, and we find that we've missed, or there's a number of applications that make sense to create rental housing units but aren't covered under this ordinance, we can simply make that amendment. I think we're all on the same page in terms of what the intent is. So with everybody's permission or support, I would recommend that we pass this ordinance with no changes.
Okay, I'm going to recognize Councilmember Doug Johnson here in a second, but along the lines of passing this and having this then the law of the land for this moment, people can look at it and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing something different, that you didn't cover, and then they can, we can have some initiatives from those who have other ideas, I guess, in the process. Councilmember Doug Johnson.
Okay, I'm all for doing a separate thing for single family construction. With this one here, though, I would delete section B, item II. I don't think that discouraging private investment is a good idea. I think if you have people out there who want to build something and can take advantage of this, they should. We haven't seen commercial development do anything to this point. So I don't see any reason to keep out private investment.
Okay, to stop back and forth on this particular thing, I'm taking
I'll second
your
that.
comments as a motion to strike B2, seconded by Councilmember Brown. This will be amendment number 2. If we don't need to discuss that one anymore, can we vote? Roll call, please.
Councilmember Martinson.
No.
Councilmember Topcock.
Sorry, could you restate that? I'm trying to keep track.
Delete B exclusions, II number 2 from the ordinance.
Yes.
Councilmember Brown.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson.
No.
Councilmember Doug Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mark Johnson.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. So S has been amended now by this. Are there any further amendments to S?
Well, if we don't, then the owner's unit is now excluded, so that if we don't do anything else.
Can you say that again?
Oh, I just, the part of the, like it's a triplex.
Yeah.
If we don't do anything, any other amendments, the owner's unit is also exempt according to this.
Correct. Okay, roll call. Are we ready? Yes. Proceed, Mr. Clerk.
On the ordinance as amended, Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Doug Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mark Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Martinson.
Yes.
Councilmember Topcock.
EE.
Councilmember Brown.
Yes.
Motion as amended carries.
Hallelujah. Okay, I know you all want to sit here all night.
Nope.
Is there,
Lump them up.
is there, okay.
We can do it.
If there's not objection, I'm going to ask the clerk to read by title ordinances, items A through I.
022-0601, an ordinance to establish, approve, and adopt the FY 2023 City of Nome General Fund Municipal Budget and exercising the power to assess and authorize the levy of the general property tax. 022-0602, an ordinance to establish, approve, and adopt the FY 2023 City of Nome School Debt Service Fund Budget. 022-0603, an ordinance to establish, approve, and adopt the FY 2023 City of Nome Special Revenue Fund Budget. 022-0604, an ordinance to establish, approve, and adopt the FY 2023 City of Nome Capital Projects Fund Budget. 022-0605, an ordinance to establish, approve, and adopt the FY 2023 City of Nome Construction Capital Projects Fund Budget. 022-0606, an ordinance to establish, approve, and adopt the FY 2023 City of Nome Port of Nome Fund Budget. 022-0607, an ordinance to establish, approve, and adopt the FY 2023 City of Nome Port of Nome Capital Projects Fund Budget. 022-0608, an ordinance approving the 2022 operations and maintenance budget for the Nome Joint Utility System. 022-0609, an ordinance approving the 2022 capital investments budget for the Nome Utility System.
Thank you. Is there a motion to pass ordinances 220601 through 09 inclusive, on to second reading, public hearing, and final passage.
So moved.
Second.
Councilmember Martinson, Councilmember Henderson. I don't think anybody wants to discuss, so roll call, please.
Councilmember Topgod.
EE.
Councilmember Brown.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Doug Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mark Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Martinson.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. That brings us to item J, resolution 220503 by title, please, Mr. Clerk.
Art 220503, a resolution setting the city of Nome mill rate for calendar year 2022.
Thank you. And Mr. Manager, the recommended mill rate or agreed mill rate that we've been discussing is 12. And this year's is
12 mils.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt ordinance or resolution 220503?
Moved.
Second.
Councilmember Martinson, Councilmember Scott, and Henderson. Is there any discussion? Roll call, please, on its adoption.
Councilmember Brown.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Doug Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mark Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Martinson.
Yes.
Councilmember Topgod.
EE.
Motion carries.
Thank you. That brings us to resolution 220504. Mr. Clerk.
R 220504, a resolution approving the employment of Joe Barone as summer laborer.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt ordinance 220504?
So moved.
Second. Councilmember Martinson, Councilmember Henderson. It took me about 6 or 7 years of knowing the family to learn that they pronounce the E on the end long. Roll call, please, on the adoption.
Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Doug Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mark Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Martinson.
Yes.
Councilmember Topgod.
EE.
Councilmember Brown.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Resolution 220505 by title, please.
R 220505, a resolution assigning 30% of the general fund ambulance net revenue to the capital projects fund for the future purchase of a new ambulance.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
So moved.
Second. Councilmember Martinson, Councilmember Henderson. This was discussed in work session, and we'll put money aside for a period here to buy a new ambulance when it's needed. Roll call, please, on its adoption.
Councilmember Doug Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mark Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Martinson.
Yes.
Councilmember Topgod.
EE.
Councilmember Brown.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Resolution 220506, Mr. Clerk.
R 220506, a resolution awarding the contract for Port of Nome Thornbush Pad drainage improvements.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt resolution 22-05-06?
So moved.
Second. Councilmembers Martinson, Councilmember Henderson. Port Director Baker is on the line.
I defer.
Anybody have any questions, or are we ready for the vote?
Do I need to recuse myself on this particular issue? Because I know this was, originally they tried to, I think they call piggyback it on the Bonanza Fuel project. And I know it went out to bid, but I just want to make sure there's no conflicts before I vote.
Bonanza Fuel was not a bidder on the current
No.
project. I see no conflict. You can vote. Roll call, please.
Mr. Mayor, one piece of clarification.
Yep.
A notice of intent to award was issued on Thursday. However, I wrote and released it after getting Glenn's signature without getting it proofread by John Blees, the city engineer. It went out saying that it was crushed aggregate, which is different than what was in the contract. So a revised notice of intent to award was issued today with the correct wording.
And that was simply a clerical, because what was in the bid specifications was what we wanted.
Correct.
Okay,
Yep, I don't see any issues with it, they're just.
for the record. All right, thank you. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Mark Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Martinson.
Yes.
Councilmember Topcock.
EE.
Councilmember Brown.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Doug Johnson.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Resolution 220507, Mr. Clerk.
R 220507, a resolution setting the City of Nome contribution for the FY 2023 Nome School District budget.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt resolution 220507?
We'll move.
Second.
Councilmember Martinson, Councilmember Henderson. This resolution will set the total local contribution at $3,150,000 to Nome Public Schools for the next calendar or school year. That's an increase of $150,000 from the current budget. The city is obligated by state law to contribute $1 million, just slightly less than $1,250,000 based on our assessed valuation. And so by this action, the city is making an additional contribution to the city of $1.9 million. So again, the total, $3,150,000. Councilmember Henderson.
We did the math right, it's 5% increase over last year's funded amount.
All right, the school district, just so you know, has been asking for at least $100,000 increase for 2 years.
More questions, thanks.
Thank you. No further questions. Roll call, please, on its adoption.
Councilmember Martinson.
Yes.
Councilmember Topcock.
EE.
Councilmember Brown.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Doug Johnson.
Yes.
Councilmember Mark Johnson.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you, Ms. Morton. Thorough but brief. Thank you.
I can do brief, sir. Wants to makes the utility crews that are shifted pretty much in full-time summer mode. Standard stuff. Nothing too exciting there. Now that the legislative session is over, there's a couple of items that are of particular interest to the utility and maybe somebody else, but to the utility, we're looking at the PCE, which is going to the governor's desk, which will up the allowable rate for residences from 500 kilowatt hours per month to 750. Pretty nifty. And the other is the Renewable Energy Fund, round 14, has $2 million in it for NJU to pursue a battery. And excited about that as well. Encourage what you're going to advance. Any questions?
I do have one.
Sure.
I was reading an article, I think it was in, about the wind project in, is it Shungnak? Where the two villages are cooperating and they got some monies and they invested in batteries and they also had to invest in, I think, controllers to help regulate. I think it's where I'm talking about. There were two villages that were participating. If NJU starts building batteries, will your existing control system work? Or do we have to make additional improvements in order to store a lot of the wind energy as opposed to using it right away?
So the power plant was constructed fairly recently and has provisions for additional generation. The batteries will essentially be a gas tank that has 2 megawatts in it. And this is the size that we're able to afford, whether that lasts 15 minutes or 30 minutes. To answer your question, we're substantially in place to integrate that technology.
Yeah, because I know, and they sell it back to AVEC, I think. And so they said they had to invest in some additional controller technology to manage it, the storage.
So the utility has a couple of folks heading up next week to Kotzebue that has a similar system, actually active. They use the same SCADA system that we use.
Thanks.
Great, thank you. City manager has a written report at page 132 and 33. Are there any questions?
Yes, sir. You don't mind.
Please, go ahead.
It'll be short.
All right.
City Hall will be closed on Monday in honor of Memorial Day. I want to thank Eva Dixon and the fourth graders also at the elementary school and everybody who was able to get out to the landfill on Beam Road. Over 60 bags of trash were picked up. Some of that along our interior fence, a lot of it outside of our fencing. We're hoping to have the vac out there. We've been having starter problems and we've been waiting for the starter to come in. I'm going to be asking probably somewhere in the next, we don't meet for another 3 weeks, for probably a work session to discuss 3D housing. This is getting it more involved, and it's going to include a number of partners. The University of Alaska at Fairbanks will be looking at technology for putting a 3D house, which is built from materials that are available in your area. Penn State is going to be looking at providing the technology for developing the 3D scanner. HUD has now brought in at least another $500,000, which will be a grant request, and that's why we really need to know where we're going by June 13th. The Denali Commission is involved in this. They've already advanced $500,000, and the Extreme Habitat, who is a nonprofit who is working to bring this style of housing into Alaska. And the mayor and I have been looking at potential property sites, obviously trying to figure out what any costs that would have to be mitigated, but also to try to see and put Nome on the map for this, where this technology is developed and implemented. One of the local organizations decided to step back, and we were approached by state government and our lobbyist who wanted us to pick this ball up and see what's possible. In some areas, putting a 3D house on is not going to be a problem because the land has been shifted enough over the years, but there are other areas where it's going to be more of a challenge. And so I'm very supportive of trying to make this happen so that it would help us, but also the villages around us possibly be able to develop affordable housing in those communities too, because not every village is like Nome. Mr. Mayor, I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, I think you covered it quite succinctly. I guess, as the manager said, not finding it, finding real stable ground, but looking at some of the outskirts where it may be less stable, just as it is, and seeing what kind of foundations could be developed to open up property in the outskirts down there on the east end. So we were pretty clear on that we didn't want it on an empty lot on Front Street, that is well compacted, but we thought that one of the research and development parts of this with HUD needed to be on the foundations in our areas that are permafrost, not just in our community, but in others. Any questions for the city manager? Okay, if you think of something, bring it up under your comments. Moving on then to citizen. Was there anything, any questions on the port report or anything added, Ms. Baker?
No, Mr. Mayor, I don't believe so. I think as we all know, we're waiting for the governor to sign the capital bill and the rest of the items. So once that happens, we'll be sharing the good news for the record.
Okay, and just to note that I signed the CAP 107 letter saying we wanted a waiver.
Thank you.
All right, then we will move on to citizens' comments. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to address the council this evening? Seeing no indication, Mr. Clerk, would you call the roll for council member comments?
Councilmember Topcock.
Not much. This council member comments, right? Sorry.
Yep.
Okay. Just really excited for graduation on Wednesday. Hopefully folks can make it out to the parade and celebrate our graduates, and it's going to be very emotional and I'm not ready for it. And I've been multitasking tonight trying to get some graduation stuff done, and that's why I'm not in person in the meeting tonight. But yeah, that's all.
All right, thank you for being here. Next.
Councilmember Brown.
Yeah, I have no further comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you to everybody for supporting the housing ordinances. And I know it got a little complicated at the end with all the amendments, but this is one of the main reasons I joined the council, was to try to come up with some potential solutions to solve our multiple housing challenges. So I really appreciate everybody's support and looking forward to lots of interest, hopefully, in the program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Doug Johnson.
I have nothing further. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Mark Johnson.
I'm encouraged by the incentives the city is giving out for encouraging rental properties, and hopefully we can continue with economic development incentives as we move forward going further. And the second comment I had was, I know we cannot direct the school on how to spend their money, I don't believe, but for this additional pot of money that we're giving them, I'm hoping to encourage them that they spend it in salaries to encourage teachers where they can, and also on our local admin staff salaries, because that will only assist in our economy here as well.
Thank you.
Councilmember Martinson. Oh, just not much. Just good to see the guys working on the softball field finally. Nice to see the poles start going in, so hopefully they get the flyers out for coaches and everything else soon, and that's gonna be fun. That's all I got.
Thank you.
That is over to you.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple of comments. Thanks to Councilmember Topcock reminding us of graduation. Saw they had a great baccalaureate thing on Sunday, and in person at the high school, and a parade gonna run around town, and KNOM is going to broadcast that live. I'm sure there'll be some Facebook lives as well, but hope we can get out and cheer our graduates on. Memorial Day, the VFW and Ladies Auxiliary is working to have a Memorial Day parade and program up at the cemetery. And I believe that's at 11 o'clock on Monday. I hope that many of us will come out and show our patriotism by joining in that short march up to the cemetery, and then down to the Snake River for Bear and Air throwing the wreath out of the helicopter to honor those who died at sea. Also, a real big thanks to Eva and everybody that came out to do that cleanup on Saturday. It was amazing to see how that landscape had changed out there, and really big thanks to our fourth graders who took some good initiative with their teachers to address a community need. And I'm gonna talk to the city people that be tomorrow. We're gonna send them ice cream on Thursday or Wednesday or whatever day they want it, in appreciation to those fourth graders for doing a good job. So that's coming from all of you. So with that, we will not have an executive session, and the time is 8:36, and we are adjourned. Thank you all. Thanks on the phone, folks, or on the Zoom. Thanks for sitting there, Joy. Oh, the window.
I know they're up there, they're working on getting those fence poles in.
Good.
You combine that on.
You can go by today to see if they got more up today.
Combine that all on.
Can't see it up there, they're working hard on Friday.
Yep.
I can't remember the exact.
Probably me.
Yeah.
Before bed.
Energy something, there was an existing